Hey, I want to welcome everyone. I'm Stephen Procopio. I'm the president of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. PAR is a nonprofit, nonpartisan state policy research organization and watchdog. As part of our monthly webinar series, today we're going to be discussing the insurance crisis in Louisiana. Louisiana has lost more than 20 property insurance companies over the last 2 years. That's not to mention the whole issue with the flood insurance rates going up because of FEMA's new risk rating. This situation, it threatens to crater the property insurance market in the state, making it difficult to get mortgages and buy homes. But to talk about that, we have gathered a fantastic panel of experts. I introduce, obviously, first of all, I'm really glad Insurance Commissioner Jim Donelon. Great to have you. Senator Jeremy Stine, not only a senator, but he represents the southwest part of the state, including Lake Charles, which has had more than their fair share of disasters and related insurance headaches. And also serves on the Senate Insurance Committee, which I'm sure is not a coincidence. And last, we have Kevin Cunningham, who is a lobbyist for the Insurance Commission, and I'm glad he's here. I noticed he's sitting a little bit back from the camera. I guess that's the, give him some space from all the tough questions that he's probably gonna have to face. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here. Just to let you know how this works, I will start off with a few overview questions, and then Melinda will follow up with some that we have prepared. But then the majority of this is going to be from questions from the audience. That's why we have these, so we have some interaction. Melinda will look through those. So if you have questions, make sure you put it in the Q&A or if the chat, either one works, and we will try to get through it. What happens every time is we don't have enough time to get through all of the questions. So the earlier you can get your questions in, the better. All right, so let's start with the questions. Firstly, let me ask, my description at the beginning about this being a crisis and increasing rates, is it really as bad as a crisis, or did I overstate the problem? And then secondly, is there something on the horizon that could turn this around, whether it's policies or changes that we need to know about? So I'd like to ask each of you to sort of briefly respond to that, and then we'll dig in some of the details later. Commissioner Donelon, why don't you start? Oh, you're on mute, Commissioner Donelon. I think everyone got put on mute as we moved over.
Got it. How's that?
Great, perfect, thank you.
Good, great, not a problem. And thank you, Stephen, for including me and for this critical discussion, because you are not overstating anything. Our state is in a crisis comparable to, perhaps even in some respects, greater than the aftermath of Katrina Rita back in 2005. I don't want to overstate it, and I would say that this is not as bad as that, but it's certainly a close second. For Katrina and Rita, we had a million claims filed, not to include $16 billion worth of payments for flood damage caused by Katrina and Rita. Fortuitously, these hurricanes of the last two hurricane seasons were relatively dry from a flood point of view. Having said that, I know that low-lying coastal areas like Port Fourchon, like Grand Isle, like Cameron Parish, certainly experienced flooding is associated with those storms, but not to the extent of widespread flooding that the NFIP paid us that $16 billion to cover for insured property after Katrina Rita. For Laura and Ida, and the two in between, Delta and Zeta, we have collected $23 billion, over 800,000 claims. So a close second, but still a second. But the best measure of the crisis we're in is the residual market, the market of state-sponsored, state-created market of last resort for policyholders who cannot get insurance in the private sector. When Laura hit 2 years ago, there were 35,000 policies representing about 0.5% of our market, down from 173,000 when Katrina and Rita hit, and 10% of our market, third only to State Farm and Allstate. And today, Citizens is back up to 128,000 policies and includes approximately 4 to 5% of our homeowners and commercial property insurance market in our state. There is no overstating the crisis. It is at our door. We're in the midst of it, and hundreds of thousands of our citizens and property owners in the state are suffering as a result of the effects, the after effects of the last two hurricane seasons.
All right, Kevin, do you want to start next? Is this a crisis? How are you?
Yeah, I do believe it's a crisis. It's normally you measure things with, and I agree with everything what Commissioner Donelon said, but you measure things with availability and affordability. Affordability is really a symptom of availability. So you really have to go back to, is insurance available? It's available, but unfortunately, it's mostly all going into citizens now. So when insurers stop leaving the market, when they stop writing insurance, there is an availability crisis. And that means you can't get insurance regardless of what what you're willing to pay for it. And so that's kind of where we're going right now. It's our belief, though, that it's a moment in time that we can, that it will adjust. We believe that the market will adjust, and insurers will believe that the market will adjust and start eventually with the right laws and right regulation, start pulling some of those policies back out of citizens and put them back into the private market. And what we need to do is create a robust private market.
All right, Senator Stine, you'll unmute. And so talking about laws and regulations, do you agree with the categorization of a crisis? And I think that tees us up to start talking about what are the right laws and regulations?
Sure. Yeah. To echo what Kevin and Commissioner Donelon said, it's absolutely a crisis without question. You can ask anyone here in Southwest Louisiana or across the state for that matter. When citizen rolls have tripled in less than 2 years, it's a crisis. When their exposure's gone from something like 6 billion to 33 billion, it's a crisis. And so, and Commissioner Donelon is I think, taking the right approach and the legislature as well in terms of how do we fix this? How do we get these folks off of the citizens' rolls? And I think setting up that Insure Louisiana incentive program is a step in the right direction. I'm sure Commissioner Donelon will touch on that somewhat, but we hopefully will have an answer in December whether we're able to fund that. I think $20 million was asked. I think that's the first step in the right direction. I think we also need to look at our rate structure and reforming the rate structure. Louisiana domiciled insurance companies, there's a retaliatory tax because we're higher here. And so if you're a Louisiana insurance company and you go to write business in another state with a lower tax, well, guess what? They're going to get hit with that retaliatory tax. And so we need to look at reforming our tax structure so that we can attract more businesses to be domiciled here. I mean, ask yourself the question, if you could be in Texas or another state with a lower premium tax to do business, and you can write into the state of Louisiana, it's a no-brainer. You would do that. And so I think we need to look hard at reforming our tax structure so that we're not hit with those retaliatory taxes.
All right, great. And I'm glad we're diving into some of the details. I love it. I'm going to turn it over to Melinda. You guys had it easy. Now she's going to start asking you the hard ones. So thank you. Melinda, what do we got for them?
Well, so first, I just want to remind folks who are watching, if they want to drop in a question in the Q&A or the chat, please do so. So far, nobody's submitted anything, but that's okay because I have a list over here just in case. But I guess I'll start with Commissioner Donelon. You brought up that the Citizens Insurance Program, which is state-run, has now 128,000 policies, and that's up from, I think it was about 35,000 policies before Hurricane Laura. I mean, that's huge. And those homeowners who are insured through that have rate increases. I think they've gone up at least 60%, and I believe as much as 70% in the last couple of years. So how are those rates even supposed to be affordable to people? And what do you advise people in terms of if they are being turned to Citizens, how they should cope with this?
Great question. And those rate increases, it's that went into effect for commercial policies November 1st, and 63% for residential policies that will go into effect January 1st. And that's horrific. And understand, those are rate increases on top of what was already the most expensive property insurance available by law to keep it from becoming a market of choice and indeed keeping it as a market of last resort so that the state does not become the insurer for hurricane exposure in Louisiana, which it cannot by any stretch under any circumstances take on that exposure. I mentioned earlier, past 2 years, $24 billion has been paid to policyholders, not to include flood. That's not included. This is private wind coverage from private insurers in our state as a result of Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida. The state can't afford that. So what can we do to help those folks who are suffering immensely with these rate increases? The commercial's already in effect. I do want to hasten to add that the residential not going into effect until January 1 will not hit existing policyholders, those 128,000 with Citizens coverage today, until they come up for their 1-year renewal. Now, some, 1/12 of them, will be hit in January. And then each month thereafter, depending on when they got their coverage, including if they get it this month or next month, they won't see that coverage, that increase hit them until the 1-year anniversary. And I also want to add that if someone gets an opportunity, as some companies are starting to write business today, to move from Citizens back to a private insurer, they can get their unearned premium for that 1 year they've paid in advance for their policy from Citizens. If there's 11 months left and they drop their Citizens policy and move to a private company, they get those 11 months of premium payments back. On the bad news side, if we don't successfully accomplish what Senator Stine referenced, and that is with the incentive program copied from what we did in the aftermath of Katrina Rita with the support of then Governor Kathleen Blanco, and depopulate Citizens. For example, when that program was first put into effect, when the money was made available and 6 companies took $29 million worth of incentive grant money and started writing policies out of Citizens, 20,000 policies moved immediately to those 6 new to our state. Well, Imperial was already doing business in our state, but the other 5 were new to our state as a result of that program. And those folks will get relief in that they will get cheaper coverage, not set by law above the private sector, and they will not be exposed for another 63% rate increase a year from now, because that rate increase that is going into effect end of this year is for the cost of reinsurance that Citizens had to pay for this ongoing hurricane season. And when they bought it on an estimate that they would have through this year, through this hurricane season and this year, a book of business of 65,000 policies, up from the 35,000 they had when Laura hit 2 years ago. And that caused them to need this 63% rate increase because of that additional reinsurance exposure that they had to get coverage for. If we don't depopulate them this year at this time with the incentive program, that will happen again next year, because instead of 65,000 policies, they now have 128,000 policies, so that when they get their reinsurance in place, it will, I'm estimating this, it will be similar to the cost of the increase last year when they went from 35,000 to 65,000, when they now go from 65 to 128,000 policies.
Well, and let me jump in here and ask Senator Stine, from your perspective, is there something that should be done to help people in the Citizens program perhaps afford insurance through, a subsidy of some kind? Or is Citizens even still the best model? Because obviously a lot of other coastal states, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, they don't have something similar. And Florida has something similar, but the state actually put some of its own money into that program. So are you still a supporter of the Citizens model? And is there some method for helping people afford insurance through Citizens? Senator, you're on mute.
Thank you. My wife wishes she could have that button for me. Yeah, so look, we've all spelled out where it's a crisis, right? So it's sort of all hands on deck at this point. We should be considering every available option. And in terms of me and the legislature, my colleagues, we're saying, hey, we'll put everything on the table. We're willing to listen and learn from other states. With that said, we're currently operating within the confines of our current structure. And that being the case, it is expensive. And look, I'm more than willing to listen to folks for next session to see if there's a better way to do this. But we got to deal with the here and now. And that being the case, we've got to move folks off of Citizens. And so I think we've spelled out one thing that we've already done, which is set up the fund. Now we got to fund it to incentivize those companies. How can we make it more attractive for companies to be here? And
just to let people know, the Insure Louisiana Incentive Fund is essentially a fund that was done after Katrina and Rita, and it lets the department provide grants to insurance companies to try and attract them here. And y'all recreated that again, but there's been no money put into it, correct?
That's correct. And it should be in December at joint budget where we to see if we're able to fund it around $20 million, close to $20 million. I think Commissioner Donelon has the exact number, but that will allow us to attract companies to write business in Louisiana. So I think that's a crucial first step. And then, okay, what's next? How can we attract more companies here? And I think our rate structure, we absolutely need to look at that. Now, with that said, we don't want third-rate insurers coming to our market again. You know, the fact that there's 11 are doing business here, that's a problem. And you know, there was a great audit that came out, and hats off to Mike Wagasback and his team for doing a very thorough job with it. And it revealed that a lot of these policies that were written were undervalued, and there just wasn't enough reinsurance. And I think we have to look at how can we attract not just any insurance company, but the right insurance company here. And so I think that's going to be something that we absolutely have to look at going forward.
And Kevin, let me ask you this question that somebody dropped in the Q&A, asking what can be done to bring underwriters back into the market? You obviously represent the insurance industry. Is there something you hear from insurance companies about what's needed to bring underwriters back?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. I mean, every policy is written every policy that is written has an underwriter. If you mean having more local underwriters, again, I'm not sure if I get the question.
I don't know if maybe the person who submitted it is maybe talking about, getting more local folks back into that market or getting more diversity into that market.
Well, it's a two-edged sword relative to a lot of the underwriting functions have probably moved out of more to back office, more to the more of a centralized location. And so you don't have as close of underwriting as you would, as you've had in the past. That's really cost-saving measures. It's ways to figure out to be able to issue a lower policy. So, that's one of the things that I think insurers have done is to not necessarily pull back on their underwriting. I'm not sure if they're talking about underwriting or if they're talking about actual claims adjusting. It sounds like it might be a claims adjusting question.
Well, now they've clarified a little bit, and it's about insurers that have left the market sort of broadly.
How to get them back? Yeah, well, I think some of the things that we have been talking about, are ways to do it. From our perspective is that you've got a number of legacy companies here. Some of those that have been here before Katrina, and they're currently here. They're not, and they will stay here. They normally have a large chunk of business in this state, and they're not going to just come in and out of the state or ebb and flow as disasters hit. So our point is with those legacy companies, find ways to incentivize them to stay here. Not necessarily the incentive program is good as a short-term fix for getting policies out of Citizens with that program. I think the commissioner passed some legislation last year that will make sure that those companies that do come in and take advantage of that, if they're new to the state, will have to have a higher surplus, which makes sense. So you don't necessarily fall back into this position. But our idea is that, give and incentivize those companies that have been here and will continue to be here to do that. How do we do that? I mean, we've been talking about for years. We can talk about the natural disasters, but we also want to talk about the man-made disasters. The man-made disasters are the regulations and the laws that these insurers have to operate under. That gets into tort reform issues. It gets into fraud issues, contractor fraud issues. All of those things are ways that we can improve the insurance environment that will, again, necessarily, have those policies come out of Citizens and stay out, not just come back in when the wind blows.
Well, and I think Senator Stine brought this up, but several of the companies that got grants through that Insure Louisiana Incentive Fund after Katrina actually ended up being some of those that became insolvent later. So how do you ensure that won't happen again this next time? And maybe that's a question for the commissioner.
Yeah, I think it is, and let me address that. But let me also, before we get off of the depopulation program, the incentive program, I got some very encouraging news in the past couple of weeks from Citizens. While their book of business continues to grow, a company, SafePoint/Cure, which is out of Miami, been around for 10 years and had a very small book of business before Laura through Ida, but took over 53,000 policies from the three of the failed companies, State National, Access Home, and Americas. They took those policies en masse, the whole bunch of them, and continued the coverage at the same conditions and premiums that the failed companies had. They have now come to Citizens in the last month as part of our annual depopulation offering of policies to the private sector and asked for 19,000 Citizens policies. And unfortunately, the agents that have right of refusal over such takeouts only approved 4,000 for takeout. But that 19,000 ask speaks to the appetite the private sector has for those policies. And I have other companies that are talking to me about participating as well. I'm amazed that SafePoint/Cure took these policies on the eve of us setting up the incentive program that would have given them money, a bonus or a incentive payment matched by theirs under the requirements of the program back then and again now, back after Katrina and again now. They have to match the grant money, typically $5 million, with $5 million of additional capital of their own, and agree to write twice that amount, $20 million of premium in the 37 declared go zone states after Katrina, parishes after Katrina and Rita, and 25%, 50% of those new $20 million worth of premium policies have to be written out of those in those 37 parishes, and 25% written out of Citizens' book of business. And it worked, as I mentioned earlier, to the tune of 20,000 policies being taken from Citizens the first time we did this back then. But this time we had the ask for 19,000 policies with no grant money at all. Secondly, let me move to the solvency issue. Absolutely needs to be addressed, and we copied Florida again in what I called by the most important bill of the session with regard to hurricane reform. And that is Senator Bowie's bill to increase the capital and surplus requirement for a license to write insurance, property insurance in our state from 3 million to 10 million. Now, 10 million is a drop in the bucket. each of these 8 failed companies left $100 million of liability on average for LIGA to pick up and pay in the aftermath of their failure. But what 10 million does do, and Florida raised theirs from 2 million to 15 million 3-4 years ago for the same reason, to incentive the owners of those companies when they go to the reinsurance marketplace before each hurricane season, that they will be more prudent / conservative in their appetite for reinsurance. Because if they don't spend money on reinsurance, that goes in their pocket. If they choose to roll the dice and increase their bottom line, they can do that to a limited degree. And all 8 of these companies that failed had inadequate reinsurance and based it upon the same catastrophe model that predicts how much a company will need in reinsurance. And it was the most liberal of the 3 national catastrophe modelers when those companies went to the reinsurance market and purchased their reinsurance coverage. By them having 10 million instead of what was typically 5 million of their own money invested, I think that might motivate them. I hope that will motivate them to be more responsible in covering their exposure for their book of business when they go to the reinsurance market.
Okay, thank you. And you brought up reinsurance. We've had a couple questions from folks about reinsurance. And Kevin, I'm going to direct this to you and you tell me if somebody else should answer it instead. But we have some questions about suggesting that the state get into the reinsurance business. Is that a good idea from the perspective of industry, or is that just adding another layer of mess into an already messy situation?
I think it's adding another layer, of which, quite frankly, I don't think the state can afford. Most of the times when that kind of discussion comes up, it's in reference to a catastrophe fund, a state-run catastrophe fund. We've had a study that was done back in 2007, and I think the numbers have probably got worse. It was a Paragon study, which actually showed that the state cannot afford to do a standalone catastrophe fund for reinsurance. And we think it's probably, as far as the companies are concerned, probably think it's a bad idea for the state to even to look at that, because again, it's all fine until the wind blows. And when the wind blows, there's somebody has to pay for it. And I mean, as Commissioner Donelon said, the last 2 years, $24 billion. A lot of that, most of that is probably laid off with reinsurers. The market worked. Even though some may have been under reinsured, the market did work, and most of that 24 billion comes out of the reinsurers. Do you want the state to be at risk for that same 24 billion? I doubt it. And how would you pay for it?
Right. Okay. I suspected that might be the answer there. Senator Stine, let me ask you this one. We've got somebody asking about an update on the Fortify Homes program. I know the legislature passed that bill in the most recent session, but I didn't see any money that was allocated for the program. Can you correct me if there is some money or if there are plans for money and what the program is actually supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, this is a very important program. Thank you for the question. Look, we took this from Alabama. They are sort of the perfect example of what we're trying to achieve here with this new fortified roofs program. We need to be more like Alabama, and I wouldn't say that when it comes to, but when it comes to fortified roof program, this is very, very important that we have this, and that's why we established it this past session. Chairman Huval was the one that introduced it. It's fortifying roof. It's making a stronger roof so that it doesn't blow off. And when you start dialing down into the actual claims, a lot of the cost that around this was from these roofs blowing off. Then you have the mold and everything else, and the costs just skyrocket. So very important program. And it's a grant program that, as far as I know, has not yet fully been funded yet. But Commissioner Donelon, I think his office has been working with this. It's been set up. It'll go into effect January 1, 2023. And I'll maybe turn it to him because he's got someone in his office currently working on this, and I'm excited about this program. We just got to get more money for it.
All right, Commissioner, can you answer if there's a funding source that you've identified?
There is not, and that was the agreement that we got from the the Finance Committee Chairman, Senator Bodie White, that he would create the program, but with the tight budget we had last fiscal year, he said, we don't have money for it. And in the committee meeting where we were created, the bill was finally passed and sent to the floor 2 nights before adjournment, and we appreciated that. We were one of a handful of worthy causes that were unable to be funded because of budgetary
What's the
constraints last year.
approximate ask? Like, how much are we looking for the fund?
If I were to be given my choice, I would say, give me $20 million and I will start handing out grants up to $5,000.
And those would go to
folks.
individual homeowners?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
That's how it worked in Alabama, Baldwin and Mobile counties first. It has now spread. Very popular program with thousands of homes fortified to that standard, which brings a certificate of that status of that roof that is transferable to the new owner of that property. So it enhances the value of the property, but mostly the purpose of it is to make our market more attractive to the rest of the insurance world, which is global. The way we spread our huge, we're more vulnerable to hurricane landfall by 4 to 1 than Florida and then Texas over the past 100 years on a per capita basis. And every time a hurricane enters the Gulf, we're almost every time in the center of the cone of probability for landfall. With Ida, we were the center as soon as it cleared Cuba and never deviated. So we have to convince the international reinsurance marketplace. 2/3 of reinsurance is located offshore: London, Zurich, Toronto, Bermuda. That's why I went to London here last month and going to Bermuda at the end of this month to tell our story. And I started our story in London with this little anecdotal bit of information. And that is, almost all of us in Louisiana, from Lake Charles to New Orleans, have new roofs on our property. You paid for them, $24 billion worth of repairs to hurricane damaged property. We're the best state for coastal exposure in the United States now. The Atlanta as well as the Gulf Coast, Atlantic as well as the Gulf Coast. So, and they nodded in agreement, not having focused on that. So Fortify will do that. That's the long-term
We got a lot of,
solution to our problem.
there
Well,
been,
Let
go ahead,
me
Melinda.
ask a question about that Fortify roof program, because a lot of people are interested in this who are watching.
Yes.
Clearly, that people would love this program to exist and actually have money. But let me ask Kevin this question. If this program gets funded and people actually get fortified roofs through this program, would the insurance companies give financial incentives or some sort of break on insurance premiums or something to the homes that actually have these fortified roofs? Because arguably they'd be better protected.
Yeah, it's hard to speak as for what an entire industry will do. But to answer your question, I think one of the things we are extremely excited about the fortified program. We can't change the geography of Louisiana. We are where we are, as the Commissioner pointed out. We're 4 times more likely to probably, I think, to get hit for a hurricane to make landfall. So what we have to do is figure out ways to be more resilient. And we just can't keep building the same way and you expect a different result. So having the Fortified Homes program out there where you really, if you keep the roof on, a lot of the other problems aren't there anymore. So the idea is to have that. Will insurers? Yeah, I've talked to reinsurers and talked to insurers. They believe that is a worthy program. So it does attack both issues. At first, it'll attack availability. You'll have more companies interested in investing their capital here because they now know that their exposure, as far as as far as claims exposure, will be reduced as a result of the number of as a result of the fortified home program. Reinsurers are also excited about it, as Commissioner said, that they want to see that Louisiana is doing something different. And so that when there is a storm, that the damages aren't as anywhere near as severe as they could be. So to answer your question more directly, yes, I do believe the industry would move toward, again, better availability, which then, once you have that competition, results in better affordability.
Well, then
And
Senator
Melinda,
Stine, I'm gonna, yes,
Can
yes.
I add one other bit of good news related to that? January 1 of the end of this year, we'll see the next upgrade in our statewide building code that was created actually again by Governor Blanco after Katrina and Rita, and got us a B- on the national insurance scorecard for building code status at that point. And it has phased increases in it, two of which were suspended, first because of the pandemic and then because of the hurricanes. And now both of those delayed improvements are going into effect January 1. That will bring our statewide building code for new construction and repaired properties up to 98% of this fortified home standard, almost requiring fortify for all repaired and new homes. So we still need the program for those who are just replacing their roof when it gets to be 15, 17, 18 years old. And that's what is done in Alabama. But
Right.
as to overall construction, I am so excited about the fact that January 1, we're going to have a new building code standard that will be 98% of the fortified standard.
Okay. Well, Senator Stine, let me ask you this one.
But-
Since we, yes.
Real quick, I wasn't in office at the time, but in 2021, there was indeed a law that went into effect, Act 30. It provides for discounts and insurance rate reductions for residential commercial buildings built to or retrofitted to reduce the threat of loss due to windstorms. Kind of piggybacking off of the conversation with fortifying your homes. And so not only is hopefully we can get some grant money, but looks like there's some deductions there as well. But
Yeah, it's a good reminder.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Well, Senator, let me ask you this way. I mean, you're in the legislature and it looks like there may be some excess funds in the current budget year. And there are obviously some dollars that haven't been spent from some previous years. Do you think that's something that the legislature should put some money into this Fortify Homes program, not just expect the insurance department to find money? Should the legislature fund it? I mean, people are actively interested in it. And Kevin just said it could help lower people's insurance premiums.
look, first let's see how much excess or whatever we may have, and then look at our needs. One thing I think in years past, what we haven't done a good job is really prioritizing. I think we're starting to do a better job with it. And so I think it's talking with, at least coming from Southwest Louisiana, talking to first and foremost my constituents who sent me to Baton Rouge and give me a sense of what their priorities are. As you know, we have a Calcasieu River Bridge that needs more funding, and that's a safety issue. So I think it's first and foremost talking to the folks back home here in Southwest Louisiana, talking to my colleagues, what's important to them for their folks back home, and getting a sense of how we want to prioritize that. But me personally, I got to believe this is right at the top of the list to find extra dollars for the not only the Restore program, Fortified Homes program, but also the Louisiana Incentive Program.
Right. Okay. One of the questions we got is that Florida's insurance has surpassed 1 million policies. Is that a state that we can look to for solutions, or are there other states that would be good models to look to for solutions to the crisis in Louisiana? I don't know who would like to take that one.
I think I'm probably the most knowledgeable in that regard. And yes, Florida, by act of their legislature, the fellow who just lost the governor's race over there had been governor before. He's now a Democrat. He was a Republican when he did this, however. and that is he lowered the cost of Florida citizens' policies by 25%. And it became, and this was 15 years ago, it became the market of choice in Florida because it was cheaper than everyone else. It resulted in this. Today in Florida, the top 8 national writers of homeowners insurance in the state of Florida have only, but let me make sure they have just under 25% of the homeowners policies in that state, because those top 8 national writers have left the market because they couldn't compete with cheaper insurance from Citizens. And in Louisiana, still today, after all of our hurricane experiences from Katrina through Ida, we still have 61% of our homeowners policies with those top 8 national writers. And it's because we have kept our Citizens book as the market of last resort. And it needs to be kept as the market of last resort. Florida's been lucky until Ian, since 2004, with their 4 horrific hurricanes in one season, the year before Katrina and Rita, they were relatively quiet. Michael was a devastating hurricane, but it hit Mexico Beach in the Panhandle, sparsely populated area of the state. Irma, which hit them when Harvey was devastating Houston to our west and to our east, skirted the state and didn't make devastating landfall in any particular part of that very popular, populated and expensive portion of their residential policies. So the reason Citizens has grown back to by the way, the last 2 governors, Rick Scott for 8 years and now DeSantis and the legislature, have been trying every which way they could to depopulate Citizens, because even Florida can't afford the risk they've taken on through that exploding number of policies in the Citizens book of business. So we don't want to copy Florida. I guarantee that. We have a natural disaster crisis. They have a man-made crisis, including making Citizens their largest insurer for homeowners in the state of Florida as we speak today.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. You get the last word on that. Everyone, thank you so much. I think this has been a great, civil, very informative discussion. And I really think just a model on what we ought to do in terms of discussing these very difficult questions. I wish we could have gotten to more. I think this might be a record in terms of amount of participation we've got from people. There were some really great questions that I left unanswered, but I just have to be respectful of people's time. Thank you all on the panel. I think you were wonderful in trying to help answer questions, even if we didn't get to all of them. And thank everyone that joined online. I really appreciate it. We'll try and get some of those questions answered. Let me also add real quick, all of this, the entire thing will be shared online on our YouTube channel. We'll be sending out links to everyone, so everyone will be able to follow us up. I suspect a lot of people are going to go back, especially because we got some very detailed answers, to try and parse through that. Thanks to everyone, both panelists and participants. I really appreciate it. Everyone have a good afternoon, a good weekend, a good Thanksgiving. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.